The sandstorm had been dying for hours, but the heat refused to let go. It clung to the dunes like a living thing, pressing into skin and lungs, turning every breath into a dry scrape that tasted of copper and old stone. Corporal Jace Rylan had stopped counting the steps a long time ago. The numbers didn't matter out here, only the rhythm did: left foot, right foot, the weight of the pack, the tug of the rifle strap, the steady hum of the emergency beacon buried under his collar plating, a tiny pulse that said, "You're still alive, keep moving." His canteen had become a prayer he carried against his ribs, not because there was much left, but because it was the last honest thing he owned on this planet. Water was truth, water was time. Water was the thin line between surviving and becoming another bleach-white set of bones the wind would sand smooth. The mission had been simple: in briefing rooms where air smelled clean and lights never flickered. Retrieve the downed survey pod, confirm no survivors, strip the data core, return to the warship, obey the Coalition's frontier law, do not interact with unregistered natives, do not compromise the quarantine, do not make yourself the story. But the desert didn't care about law, and Jace had never been good at pretending he didn't care about people, especially not after the last battle in the Kestrel Belt, where screams bounced off bulkheads and the medic's hands had been too slow, and he'd learned how fast life leaves when the universe decides you're done. He spotted the movement at the edge of the broken rocks first, a shimmer of pale fabric or maybe heat distortion. His tired eyes played tricks now. The horizon constantly rearranged itself into lies. He tightened his grip on the rifle anyway, heart thudding, not fear exactly, more like a soldier's habit of expecting pain. Then the sound reached him, small, ragged. Not a predator's growl but a whimper. More than one. Layered like thin threads pulled too tight. Jace slowed, lowering his center of gravity as he approached the rock outcropping. The wind shifted and carried the scent of something sweet and wrong. A floral note mixed with the sharpness of fierce sweat. Alien. He crested the last ridge of stone and saw her. She was half in shadow, half in the hard glare of afternoon, crouched with her back against the rock as if the planet itself had tried to push her into the ground. Her skin carried a faint opalescent sheen that caught the light in soft colors, blues and lilacs, like moonlight trapped under ice, and her eyes were too big for a human face, wide and reflective, pupils thin as slits, watching him like he was the final verdict. A veil of torn cloth hung from her shoulders, woven with faint metallic threads that shimmered when she moved. Even damaged, it looked expensive, ceremonial, the kind of garment you didn't wear to wander a desert alone. And in her arms, pressed to her chest, were three small creatures, not quite cats, not quite foxes. Their ears were long and frayed at the tips, their fur clumped with sand, their tongues lolling. Each breath they pulled in was a shallow fight against heat. Their bodies trembling in tiny spasms. Jace felt the world narrow, the way it did before a firefight. Every detail sharp, every sound loud, his own pulse roaring in his ears. The alien girl's throat bobbed as she swallowed. Her gaze flicked to his canteen, then away, then back again, shame and desperation crashing into each other behind her eyes. She didn't speak at first. Maybe she couldn't. Maybe she was afraid that sound would turn him into a threat. He took one step closer, slow, palms open, rifle angled down. His voice came out rough from thirst, but he forced gentleness into it. "Easy. I'm not here to hurt you." The translator bead at his collar clicked softly, listening, ready to map unknown phonemes. But she still said nothing, only tightened her hold on the dying animals as if she could keep life inside them by refusing to let go. Jace's training screamed in his head: Coalition law, quarantine zone, unknown native, do not interfere, report and withdraw. But he saw the way one of the creature's ribs showed with each breath, saw the cracked edges of its lips, saw the dust stuck to a tongue that should have been wet, and something inside him went cold with a familiar grief. Because it wasn't just animals, not really, it was dependence, it was innocence, it was the simple truth that something was dying and he was the only one standing close enough to stop it. The girl finally whispered, her voice thin like wind through reeds. "Please." The translator caught the word in broken fragments, then shaped it into his language. The meaning arrived with brutal clarity. She lifted her chin just a little, not pride, more like surrender. And her eyes shone, not with tears yet, but with the pressure of them gathering. Jace's hand went to his canteen, and the moment his fingers touched it, he felt the weight of choice settle on him like armor. He knew exactly how much was left because he'd measured it in sips like a man counting bullets. A mouthful now would buy him another hour, maybe two, enough to reach the survey pod, enough to transmit coordinates, enough to wait for pickup if the beacon held. Giving it away would mean walking into the furnace with nothing but faith. He glanced past her to the open desert. The sun hung like a judgment. The air rippled. The distance between here and safety stretched like a cruel joke. Then he looked back at the creatures again. 3 pairs of glazed eyes, bodies too small to bargain with the universe. And he remembered a child on a station once, handing him a cup of water when his hands shook after a battle. No questions, no hesitation, just kindness offered like it was the easiest thing in the world. His throat tightened. He unscrewed the cap. The sound was loud in the silence, and the girl flinched as if she expected him to drink, to prove that survival mattered more than her. Instead, he knelt, lowering himself to their level, and poured a thin stream into the nearest creature's mouth, careful, slow, letting it swallow, watching as the tremors eased by a fraction. The second creature drank greedier, tiny paws pushing weakly against his glove, and Jace steadied it with 2 fingers, soothing. The third one barely managed to lift its head, and for a terrifying second he thought it was too late. But then the water touched its tongue and its eyes blinked, as if waking from a dark dream. Behind him, he heard the alien girl's breath break. A soft sound that wasn't quite a sob. He poured more than he meant to, because once you start saving something, it becomes hard to stop. The stream ran, the canteen lightened, the weight of his own future slipping away with every drop. When he finally stopped, only a shallow pool remained at the bottom, a few sips at most. He capped it, and for a moment he just stayed kneeling, his hands resting on his thighs, staring at the sand, feeling the heat press in, feeling the enormity of what he'd done. The alien girl shifted closer, slow, like she feared sudden movement would shatter the miracle. Her eyes were wet now, tears shining on her cheeks like liquid gemstones. She spoke again, voice trembling, and this time the translator caught more. Words tumbling out like she'd been holding them in for days. You gave them life when the law of this world said they should die. Jace swallowed, his throat burning, his tongue heavy, and he forced himself to stand, because standing meant continuing, and continuing was all he had left. "What's your name?" he asked softly. She hesitated, then said it, a sound like distant bells. "Salith." The translator struggled, then offered a close shape. "Princess Salith." The word hit Jace like a silent blast. Princess. His eyes flicked to the metallic thread in her torn veil, the subtle crest pattern woven into it, the kind of mark you'd see stamped on diplomatic cargo, the kind of mark that started wars when it was insulted. He felt the desert tilt beneath him, not from heat this time, but from consequence. Somewhere far above, beyond clouds and atmosphere, warships patrolled the frontier, and laws were enforced by men in clean uniforms who never had to watch small creatures die in sand. Jace looked down at his nearly empty canteen, and understood the truth with a sinking, steady dread. This wasn't just a rescue anymore. This was a line crossed, a fate set in motion, and the desert, indifferent as ever, swallowed the last echo of his choice and waited to see who would come to collect the price. The heat did not loosen its grip when Jace turned away from the rocks. It followed him like a memory that refused to fade, the kind that pressed into the back of the skull and whispered that choices could not be unmade. Princess Salith walked beside him now, close enough that the torn edge of her veil brushed his arm when the wind shifted. She moved with care, each step measured, as if the desert were a hostile court where one wrong gesture could invite execution. The 3 small creatures were bundled against her chest, wrapped in what remained of her ceremonial cloth. Their breathing no longer the frantic rasp it had been before, but still shallow, still fragile, life clinging by threads that could snap if the heat rose even a little more. Jace adjusted his pace without thinking, slowing to match her shorter stride. A habit learned from escorting wounded soldiers through debris fields. You moved together or you didn't move at all. "Where are you headed?" he asked quietly, his voice rough, not wanting to startle her. Salith's eyes flicked to the horizon, then to the sky. A flicker of bitterness crossed her face like a passing cloud. "There is no place to head," she said, the translator shaping her words with a soft delay. "My escort ship was destroyed above this world. They were supposed to deliver me." to the outer colonies for binding, but the ambush came first. Binding, Jace repeated, the word sitting heavy in his mouth, like a legal term that hid something sharp underneath. Her grip tightened on the creatures. One of them let out a weak sound and she murmured to it in her own language. A sound that was all comfort and sorrow tangled together. A political union, she said, her tone flat, chosen by the council, enforced by law, refusal carries penalties. Jace felt a familiar anger stir, slow and dangerous, the kind he kept buried because it made orders feel optional. And you refused, he said, not a question. Salith met his gaze then. Really met it. Her eyes held a fire that the desert had not burned out. I did, she said, and they named me traitor to my own bloodline. They stripped my guard, sent me away to make an example. I was not meant to survive the journey. The truth settled between them like dust, fine and suffocating. Jace looked at the horizon again, calculating distances the way soldiers did when the map was gone. The survey pod was still his best chance. Its comm array could reach orbit if the storms didn't interfere, but bringing an alien royal to a coalition signal was not just a violation, it was an invitation to disaster. His canteen knocked against his hip as he walked, light, almost mocking. He could feel the dryness in his mouth spreading. A slow bloom of pain that reminded him of the cost already paid. We need shade before sunset, he said. Focusing on the practical, there's a rock formation a few clicks east. We can shelter there until the temperature drops. Salith nodded, trusting him with the ease of someone who had nothing left to lose. As they walked, the desert changed. The sand gave way to broken stone and ancient mineral veins that caught the light in sharp flashes. The wind carried distant thunder though the sky remained clear. The planet had a way of threatening without delivering. One of the creatures stirred, lifting its head, its eyes clearer now. It sniffed the air and let out a sound that almost sounded curious. Salith's breath caught, hope blooming in her chest so fast it hurt. They live, she whispered, like she was afraid saying it louder would tempt fate. For now, Jace said gently, but inside he felt something twist. He had saved them from thirst, not from the world. The shadow of the rock formation stretched toward them as the sun dipped lower, and with it came a shift in the air, a whisper of coolness that felt like mercy. They reached the shelter just as the light softened. Jace scanned the area out of habit. No movement, no tracks that worried him, only the vast, patient quiet of a planet that had watched countless lives pass and forgotten them all. He helped Salith settle against the stone, positioning her so the remaining shade covered the creatures. He moved with the same care he would have shown a wounded comrade, gentle, precise. She watched him with a strange expression, curiosity layered over exhaustion. Why did you do it? She asked after a moment, her voice low. Do what? Give your water, she said. The law of this sector would have protected you if you let us die. Jace leaned back against the rock, feeling its warmth seep into his spine. He stared at the sky, searching for words that didn't feel like excuses. Because I've seen what happens when people follow the law instead of their conscience, he said finally. And because I couldn't walk away. Salith was quiet, absorbing that. Her fingers traced the faint pattern on one of the creature's ears. In my people's stories, she said softly, humans are called the unbound. You obey rules until they conflict with your hearts. Then you become dangerous. He let out a dry laugh that turned into a cough. Dangerous is one word for it. She smiled then. A small, fragile thing, but real. And it did something to him, eased a tightness he hadn't known was there. The light faded further, the first stars beginning to pierce the sky, and with them came a distant sound, so faint Jace almost missed it. A hum, low and rhythmic, not natural, not wind. He stiffened, his hand drifting toward his rifle, every sense sharpening. Do you hear that? He asked. Salith's smile vanished, replaced by dread. She listened, her face draining of color. Yes, she whispered, that is not from this world. The hum grew louder, resolving into a pattern he knew too well, the controlled vibration of an engine designed for atmosphere entry. A shuttle? Jace said, teeth clenched. Whose? Salith asked, fear threading through her voice. He didn't answer right away, because the truth had too many edges. Coalition patrols would scan the surface looking for their missing survey pod, and Salith's enemies would be hunting her with equal desperation. Either way, he said slowly, we're about to become very visible. The hum intensified, casting a shifting shadow across the rocks as something large passed overhead, the air vibrating, dust lifting. In thin spirals around them, Jace looked at Salith, at the small lives pressed against her heart, at the empty horizon that offered no easy escape. He realized then that the rescue he had started with a canteen was no longer his to control. It was moving now, gaining momentum, drawing attention from forces that didn't care about mercy. And somewhere above them, engines roared as fate adjusted its course. Aiming straight for the two of them, the shadow passed, but the sound did not fade. It lingered in the air like a warning that refused to be ignored. The low hum vibrating through the stone beneath Jace's boots and into his bones. He pulled Salith closer into the deeper shade without touching her. A subtle shift of position that put the rock between them and the sky, the kind of instinct drilled into soldiers who survived long enough to learn when to hide instead of fight. The creatures sensed it too, their small bodies tensing, ears flattening. The faint, curious sounds they had made moments ago replaced by silence. Salith's breath came shallow now, her fingers tightening in the fabric around them. Her gaze fixed upward as if she could see through stone. That craft, she whispered. It carries a resonance I recognize. Jace crouched, scanning the sky through the narrow gap between rocks. Nothing visible yet. Only stars sharpening as dusk deepened. Coalition uses standardized engines, he said quietly, clean signatures, regulated output. That one sounds older, heavier. Her eyes flicked to him. Something unreadable moving behind them. My people's hunters favor endurance over elegance. She said, their ships are built to follow, not to announce. The word hunters settled between them, heavy and deliberate. Jace exhaled slowly, measuring options that didn't exist. He could trigger his beacon and call down authority. But authority came with questions, and questions led to cells and tribunals and laws that didn't care why you broke them. He could run, but the creatures were still weak, and Salith had crossed days of desert already. Her strength was held together by will and fear. The hum shifted, drifting, circling. They are searching, Salith said. Her voice steady in a way that frightened him more than panic would have. They know I survived the crash. Why send hunters for a princess? Jace asked, keeping his voice low. She looked away, her jaw tightening. Because I am not only a princess, she said. I am a complication. The word echoed, layered with meaning. She hesitated, then continued, as if the sound of the engines had stripped away whatever restraint she had left. My bloodline carries something ancient, she said, a covenant older than the coalition, older than my own people's current laws. It binds us to certain worlds, certain creatures. Her gaze dropped to the small animals in her arms, her fingers brushing their fur with reverence. They are not pets, she said softly. They are bonded kin, living echoes of that covenant. Jace felt a chill that had nothing to do with temperature. Living echoes of what, he asked. Salith's eyes lifted to the stars again, reflecting them like distant fires. Of a promise, she said, that my people would protect this world and those born of it. In exchange, the world protected us, guided us, shaped our fate. The desert wind sighed around them, carrying grains of sand that whispered against stone. Then why abandon it? Jace asked. Why let you be sent away? Her mouth curved into a sad smile. Because power forgets promises when they become inconvenient, she said. The council wanted alliances, warships, expansion. The covenant limited all of that. So they declared it obsolete, and declared me disobedient for refusing to renounce it. The engine hum grew louder again, closer, sweeping. Jace shifted his rifle, fingers tightening. He felt very small suddenly, standing between ancient oaths and modern war machines with a nearly empty canteen and a conscience that refused to stay quiet. One of the creatures stirred, pressing its head against Salith's collarbone. A faint warmth passing between them, and Jace saw something strange. The air around them shimmered, just for a heartbeat, like heat haze bending light in the wrong direction. He blinked, uncertain if thirst had finally begun to play tricks on him. Salith noticed his stare, her eyes widening slightly. You can see it, she murmured, surprise threading her fear. See what? The resonance, she said, the bond responding to distress. Humans are not supposed to perceive it so clearly. Jace swallowed, his mouth painfully dry. I've had worse hallucinations, he muttered, but his voice lacked conviction. The hum cut sharply, engines throttling down, the sound resolving into a position overhead. Dust rained from the rock ceiling in thin streams. Salith went rigid. They have locked on, she whispered. Jace moved without thinking, pressing his back to the stone, rifle up, though he knew how useless it would be against a shuttle. Adrenaline surged, sharpening fear into focus. If they land, he said, they'll see us. Yes, she said, and they will not negotiate. The creatures whimpered softly, as if sensing the danger pressing in from above. Jace looked at Salith, really looked at her, at the exhaustion etched into her posture, at the quiet defiance that had survived betrayal, exile, and desert. You trusted me, he said, more statement than question. She nodded once. You gave water when you did not have to, she said. That is not something my people forget. Something inside him twisted, a mix of pride and dread. I don't know how to fight ancient covenants or royal hunters, he admitted. Salith's gaze softened, and in it he saw not a princess, but a young woman carrying the weight of a world that had decided she was expendable. You do not need to fight them, she said quietly. You need only choose. Choose what? Whether you stand with law that abandons its promises, or with fate that still remembers them. The engines roared again, a sharp burst as landing thrusters engaged somewhere beyond the rocks. Light flared against stone, shadows dancing violently. Jace felt the moment stretch, thin and fragile, like the last drop of water at the bottom of his canteen. He thought of the warship waiting in orbit, of officers who would quote statutes while lives withered in heat, of a child handing him water without hesitation. Then he looked at Salith, at the shimmering air around her and the creatures, at the quiet power humming just beneath the surface of the world. The shuttle touched down, the ground trembling. Footsteps followed, heavy, purposeful, approaching. Jace set his jaw, heart pounding. Whatever this was, it was no longer just her fate on the line. The desert had revealed its secret, and now it demanded an answer. The footsteps stopped just beyond the rocks, close enough that Jace could hear the faint crunch of sand under armored boots, close enough that every breath felt too loud, too revealing. The air vibrated with restrained power, weapons on standby, sensors probing, the hunters patient in the way only professionals were. Salith closed her eyes, and for a moment Jace thought she was surrendering to despair. But then he felt it again, that subtle pressure in the air, like the world drawing a breath of its own. The creatures stirred sharply, their bodies warming, their weak heartbeats growing stronger beneath Salith's arms, and the shimmer returned, brighter this time. No longer a trick of light, but a living presence that bent shadow and sound around them. Jace's skin prickled, every instinct screaming that something enormous had just noticed them. Salith opened her eyes, and they were no longer only afraid. They were resolute, ancient. They are here, she said softly. The hunter's leader spoke then, his voice amplified, calm, authoritative. Princess Salith of the Covenant line, by decree of the High Council, you are ordered to surrender yourself and relinquish the bonded organisms. Resistance will be met with force. Jace tightened his grip on the rifle, though he knew it meant nothing, his body still defaulting to defiance even when logic said it was futile. Salith did not answer immediately. Instead, she lowered her head to the creatures and whispered something in her own language, a sound like wind moving through deep roots. The shimmer surged, the stone beneath their feet warming, faint lines of light threading through the rock as if veins had awakened. Jace stared, breath caught, the desert itself responding. Then Salith spoke, her voice carrying without amplification, steady and clear. I reject your decree, she said, by the older law you chose to forget. A pause followed, sharp and dangerous. Older law does not apply, the hunter replied, its authority revoked. Salith smiled then, and the expression was not gentle. It was fierce, luminous. Law cannot revoke what it does not own, she said. The ground trembled, not from engines this time, but from something deeper, slower, a resonance that rolled outward like a tide. Jace staggered, dropping to one knee, the rifle slipping from his fingers as the air thickened, gravity itself seeming to shift. The creatures cried out, not in pain, but in chorus, a sound that resonated with the stone and sand and sky. Light erupted around them, not blinding, but vast, spreading in concentric patterns that raced across the desert floor, racing toward the hunters, toward the shuttle, toward the horizon. Jace felt memories that were not his flood his mind, images of this world before the desert. When water ran openly and life moved in balance, when Salith's bloodline stood as stewards rather than rulers, he gasped, overwhelmed, realizing with a shock that the covenant was not symbolic. It was biological, planetary. Salith turned to him in the heart of the light, tears streaming down her face now, not from fear, but from release. I did not tell you the full truth, she said, voice trembling. My line does not merely protect this world. We awaken it. Jace shook his head, struggling to stay conscious. Awaken it how? She looked past him, toward the hunters whose silhouettes now wavered in the glow, their weapons useless, their confidence cracking. By choosing someone else, she said, someone outside our blood. The realization hit him harder than any blast. Me, he breathed. Salith nodded, pain and gratitude tangled together. The covenant requires consent, she said. The world listens only when a bound one acts through free will. You gave life without obligation, without law. That choice made you visible to it. The light pulsed, responding. The hunters shouted orders, their formation breaking as the ground beneath them softened, stone turning to shifting sand, swallowing their advance. Jace felt the heat drain from his body, replaced by a strange clarity, the pain of thirst receding as if the world itself was offering him sustenance in return. You used me, he said hoarsely, not accusation, just awe. Salith's voice broke. I hoped you would walk away, she said. I prayed you would not be here when they came, but fate does not bend gently. The desert surged again, a wave of force slamming into the shuttle, lifting it from the ground like a discarded toy, sending it tumbling end over end before it crashed in the distance. Engines screaming and then going silent. The hunters fell back, some dropping to their knees, others fleeing as the terrain reshaped itself, pathways closing, shelter vanishing. Jace watched, stunned, his soldier's mind struggling to reconcile this with everything he knew about power and control. High above, the sky darkened as clouds gathered from nowhere, heavy with moisture, thunder rolling like distant drums. Rain began to fall, slow at first, then harder, cool drops striking his skin, soaking into the sand, the desert drinking deeply, greedily. Jace laughed, a raw sound torn from his chest. Rain on a dead world. Salith sagged then, the light fading as quickly as it had risen. The creatures slumping, exhausted but alive. Jace caught her as she fell, her weight real and fragile in his arms. I'm here, he whispered, though he wasn't sure who he was promising it to. Her, the world, or himself. She looked up at him weakly, eyes still glowing faintly. Now the warships will come, she said. The coalition will not ignore a world that answers a human's touch. Jace looked at the rain, at the reshaped horizon, at the distant wreck of the shuttle. Let them come, he said quietly, because whatever law they brought with them, it would have to answer to something older now. And in the falling rain, with a planet awakening around them, Jace understood the twist of fate he had stepped into. He had not just rescued a princess. He had been chosen by a world. The rain did not last long. It never did on worlds like this, but the memory of it lingered in the air. A scent of wet stone and rebirth that clashed violently with the sharp metallic tang of engines descending from orbit. Jace felt it before he saw it, the pressure change, the distant thunder that was not thunder at all, but mass entering atmosphere with intent. Salith stirred in his arms, her eyes snapping open, the faint glow within them flaring as if answering a call only she could hear. They have felt it, she whispered, her voice hoarse. Every major power monitors anomalies like this. A dead world breathing again is not subtle. Jace eased her back against the rock, scanning the sky as the clouds tore apart, revealing streaks of fire, dozens of them, descending in disciplined formation. Coalition warships, he said. Recognizing the silhouettes even at this distance, carriers, enforcement cruisers, orbital command platforms, they moved with the cold precision of law made manifest. And not only them, Salith added, her gaze tracking another formation farther out, sleeker, darker, vessels bearing sigils older than the coalition charter. My people's houses will come as well, some to reclaim me, others to erase what I represent. The horizon seemed to shrink as the sky filled with power, engines roaring like judgment, shadows racing across the desert floor. Jace's comm unit crackled to life. The survey pod's emergency signal finally answered. A stern voice cutting through static. Unidentified ground unit, this is Coalition Enforcement Vessel Resolute. You are ordered to stand down and prepare for retrieval. All anomalous entities are to be secured under frontier law. Resistance will be treated as hostile action. He closed his eyes for a heartbeat. The weight of it all pressing down. One soldier, one princess, one awakening world. Against fleets built to crush rebellion before it learned to speak. Salith's hand found his wrist, her touch warm, grounding. They cannot unmake what has begun, she said, but they can drown it in blood if they choose. As if summoned by her words, the ground shuddered again. This time not gently, not like a waking stretch, but like a flinch. Jace felt it through his boots, through his spine, the planet reacting to fear, to threat. High above, the first coalition cruiser adjusted its orbit, weapons arrays sliding into alignment, massive cannons turning toward the surface, not firing yet, but making a point. A warning shot echoed moments later. A lance of energy carving a glowing scar across the far desert, sand turning to glass in an instant. The message was clear: comply or be erased. Jace opened his eyes, jaw set, and keyed his calm. His voice steady despite the dryness clawing at his throat again. Resolute, this is Corporal Jace Rylan, Coalition Infantry, he said. My mission status has changed. This world is no longer inert. Any hostile action will destabilize the system. There was a pause. Then a colder reply. Your assessment is noted, Corporal. Authority remains with the Coalition. Step away from the anomaly immediately. Salith let out a bitter laugh, the sound sharp with pain. They still think this is an object, she said, something to be owned. The creatures stirred weakly, their bodies glowing faintly in rhythm with the planet's pulse. And Jace saw something new, lines of light spreading outward from them, racing beneath the sand toward distant points on the horizon. What's happening? He asked. Salith's eyes widened, awe and terror mixing. It is calling its kin, she said, worlds bound by the same ancient promise, dormant, watching, waiting. As if to confirm it, alarms screamed from the sky. Even from this distance, Jace could hear the panic in overlapping comm channels. Ships reporting sensor overloads, gravitational anomalies, signals blooming across the sector like stars being born all at once. The galaxy was waking up to what they had done. On the horizon, alien warships dropped from hyperspace, dozens of them, banners of rival houses flaring to life, some angling protectively toward the planet, others forming aggressive wedges, weapons hot, centuries-old feuds igniting in an instant. Coalition commanders shouted orders, fleets repositioned, targeting matrices overlapping. The vacuum above the planet becoming a chessboard stacked with explosives. Jace felt small again, not powerless, but painfully aware that his simple act of mercy had become a spark thrown into a powder magazine the size of a star system. Salith leaned heavily against him, her strength fading. This is the consequence, she said softly, of choosing compassion in a universe built on control. He looked at her, at the creatures, at the sky burning with ships and intent. Do you regret it? He asked. She met his gaze without hesitation. No, she said, because now they must reveal themselves, all of them, their greed, their fear, their laws written in ink instead of life. The ground trembled violently as massive forms began to rise far away. Shapes Jace could barely comprehend. Silhouettes of stone and light pushing free from the earth. Ancient guardians answering the call. Coalition sensors went wild, targeting nothing and everything, panic bleeding through discipline. A new voice cut into Jace's calm. Not coalition, not alien, but something deeper, resonant, layered. Bound one, it said, the covenant is acknowledged, protection will be given, but conflict is inevitable. Jace's breath caught. I never asked for this, he said aloud, though he wasn't sure who he was speaking to. The voice answered anyway. You asked when you chose life over survival. Above them, the first shots of a much larger battle were fired, energy beams crossing the sky, shields flaring, ships maneuvering desperately as the sector teetered on the edge of open war. Jace pulled Salith closer as the sky burned, understanding at last the scale of what had begun. This was no longer a rescue, no longer even a rebellion. It was the birth of a conflict that would redraw borders, shatter laws, and force the galaxy to decide whether mercy was a weakness or the most dangerous power of all. The sky tore itself open above them, not with fire alone, but with intention, beams of light crossing like dueling blades, shields blooming and collapsing in violent flashes that painted the desert in alternating colors of hope and annihilation. Jace held Salith as the ground shook, each distant impact sending tremors through stone and bone. The creatures pressed between them, glowing brighter now. No longer weak embers but steady flames. Their small bodies humming in harmony with something vast and awake beneath the sand. Coalition warships barked commands across open channels. Voices clipped and strained, discipline cracking as formations buckled under impossible readings. Gravity wells spiking, energy flows reversing, laws of physics bending like rules written for someone else's universe. Salith struggled to sit upright, pain etched into every movement, but her eyes burned with purpose. It is reaching its limit, she said, voice tight. The world cannot shield us forever without a conduit. Jace felt the truth of that settle in his chest, heavy and undeniable. A conduit, he repeated, meaning me. She nodded, tears streaking down her face, each one glowing faintly before falling into the sand and vanishing. I never wanted to bind another to this burden, she said. My ancestors chose freely, but they were born to it. You were not. He looked at her then, really looked, not at a princess or symbol, but at a woman who had lost everything except her refusal to let the world be consumed by convenience and cruelty. I was born to something, he said quietly, maybe not this, but I've been running from it for a long time. Above them, a coalition cruiser shattered, its shields failing as a surge from the planet tore through its hull, debris scattering like falling stars. The shockwave rippling through fleets on both sides. The comm unit screamed warnings, evacuation orders, frantic recalculations. Salith gasped, clutching his arm. If this continues uncontrolled, she said, the backlash will kill millions, this world included. Jace closed his eyes for a heartbeat, memories flashing. A battlefield lit by emergency strobes, a dying soldier gripping his hand, begging him not to let it be for nothing. A child offering water with a smile that said kindness was not a transaction. He opened his eyes and made the decision before fear could argue. Tell me what to do, he said. Salith's breath hitched, relief and terror colliding. You must stand where the bond first answered, she said, at the heart of the resonance. Let the world feel your intent. Not anger, not defiance, but choice. The ground beneath them split gently, not violent, opening like an invitation, revealing a core of soft light pulsing in time with Jace's heartbeat. Heat washed over him, not burning, but cleansing, thirst evaporating into a deep, steady warmth that filled his chest. He rose to his feet, steady despite the chaos above, every instinct screaming at him to take cover, to survive, but something older, quieter, held him upright. Salith reached for him, her fingers brushing his sleeve. If you do this, she whispered, you will never be invisible again. He smiled at her. A tired, honest thing. I stopped being invisible when I gave away my water. He stepped into the light, and the world answered. Pain flared first, sharp and consuming. Memories not his own flooding through him. Civilizations rising and falling. Guardians standing watch through ages of silence. The long loneliness of a planet waiting for someone to remember it mattered. Jace screamed, not in fear, but in release, his voice echoing across the desert and into the sky. A human sound carried on alien power. The fleets froze mid-battle, weapons stalling, systems rebooting as a wave of energy rolled outward. Not destructive, but absolute. A declaration felt rather than heard. Bound one has chosen. The layered voice spoke again. carrying across every channel, every bridge, every command deck. Conflict will cease or consequence will follow. Coalition admirals stared at their displays in stunned silence, watching control slip from their grasp, laws rendered irrelevant by something that did not recognize authority born of conquest. Salith collapsed to her knees, sobbing openly now, the creatures lifting their heads, voices rising in a clear, resonant call that harmonized with Jace's, sealing the bond. He felt himself anchored, not trapped, but connected to Salith, to the world, to a promise that felt frighteningly simple: protect life. Energy surged one final time, then settled, ships powered down as if compelled by a hand far larger than their captains. Rival fleets holding position, weapons cold. Silence fell, vast and reverent. Jace staggered back, Salith catching him despite her weakness, the two of them clinging together as the storm passed. "You did it," she whispered, awe threading her tears. "No," he said, voice raw, "we did." Above them, the stars seemed brighter, closer, as if the universe itself leaned in to witness what came next. The climax had passed, but the cost remained, written into Jace's bones and Salith's blood. The galaxy had been forced to pause, to listen, and now it would have to decide whether it could live with the answer a human and a forgotten world had given it. The silence that followed was not empty. It was full, thick with meaning, like the pause after a vow when the universe leans closer to hear if it was meant. The fleets held their positions in the sky, engines idling, weapons dark, thousands of lives suspended between orders that no longer applied and consequences no one fully understood. Jace sat on the warm stone with Salith beside him, the desert calm now, reshaped but peaceful. The creatures curled between them, alive, breathing, their faint glow a steady rhythm that matched the planet's heart. He felt different, not powerful in the way weapons made you powerful, but rooted, as if something inside him had finally found where it belonged. The thirst was gone, replaced by a quiet clarity that made every sensation sharp and real. Salith watched the sky, her expression unreadable, grief and relief intertwined. "My people will call this heresy," she said softly. "The coalition will call it an unacceptable precedent." Jace followed her gaze, seeing the ships as symbols now rather than threats. "Let them call it whatever they want," he said, "they still have to live with it." A new signal rippled through the air, gentler than before, a request rather than a demand. "This is High Admiral Kess of the Coalition," a voice said, stripped of its earlier certainty. "Corporal Rylan, Princess Salith, we request dialogue." Jace almost laughed, the sound catching in his chest. "Dialogue," he murmured. "Guess the universe finally made them listen." Salith closed her eyes briefly, then nodded. "We will speak," she said, "but not as subjects." The message carried upward without effort, the world itself amplifying her words. Minutes passed, or maybe hours. Time felt less rigid now, less eager to rush them forward. Jace looked down at his hands, half expecting to see something changed, glowing lines or alien marks. But they were still human, scarred, familiar. "Do you regret choosing me?" he asked quietly. Salith turned to him, her gaze warm and fierce all at once. "No," she said, "you were never chosen because you were strong. You were chosen because you were kind when no one was watching." The words settled deep, heavier than any metal he had ever worn. Above them, one by one, ships began to withdraw, not retreating, but repositioning, borders redrawn in real time by something no treaty had predicted. The ancient voice spoke again, softer now. No longer a command but a benediction. "The bond is sealed, stewardship shared. This world will endure, and through it so will you." Jace felt the truth of it settle, not immortality, not invincibility, but purpose that extended beyond his own lifespan. Salith leaned her head against his shoulder, exhaustion finally claiming her. "I was raised to believe destiny was a cage," she whispered, "something built by ancestors to trap the living." He rested his cheek against her hair, feeling the steady warmth there. "Maybe destiny's just a path," he said, "one you only see after you choose to walk it." The creatures stirred, one of them stretching, another letting out a soft sound that was unmistakably content. and Salith smiled through tears. They will be guardians one day, she said, not because of blood or law, but because they were saved. Jace watched the horizon where green shoots already pushed through sand, fragile but defiant. Funny thing, he said, all I did was give away my water. Salith lifted her head to look at him, eyes shining. You gave away certainty, she said, and that is rarer. The sun rose fully then, its light gentler than before, painting the desert in gold instead of fire. The world no longer hostile, but awake, aware. Jace stood, offering her his hand, and she took it without hesitation. Together, they faced the future, not knowing how many battles still waited, how many laws would break before new ones formed. But knowing this much was true, the galaxy would remember this moment, not as the day a world awakened, but as the day a human chose mercy over survival, and the universe answered. Far above, warships turned away from conquest, councils drafted new words for old truths, and stories began to spread. Stories of a soldier who crossed a line in the sand and found a destiny waiting on the other side. Jace Rylan, once just a name on a roster, became something else entirely, a bridge between what was and what could be, and on a once-forgotten world, under a sky that had learned how to reign again. A human and an alien princess walked forward together, not bound by law, not driven by fear, but guided by a promise older than empires, that life, once chosen, would always find a way forward.